So, hi everybody, and hi Yvonne. It's just brilliant to have you here today to catch up with you. I have been recently sharing some hints and tips for my clients around this time of year because it's so crazy. And the most common thing is people feeling overwhelmed with what's going on. And the other one, of course, is relationship challenges. You know, we get people in a room, people haven't seen each other for months, maybe years, and people struggle. And my focus has been on providing what I'm terming first aid for in the moment difficulties. Now, I know that, you and I met not that long ago when I took part in your amazing challenge over 3 days. And, your focus obviously is on grief and loss. And that is huge at this time of year. So many people, it's a trigger, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
I'm absolutely rapt to have you along, and I'd love for you to share maybe a little bit about how you coped with your first Christmas, and maybe share some things that people can apply in a first aid type manner for this season. And I know that both of us are very hot on that it isn't sustainable, but we're trying to support people through this challenging time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My husband actually died of a horrible accident the day after Christmas. So I had a very difficult time for 15 years. But I realized when doing my research on it that 55% of the US population suffer from holiday blues. 36% is related to grief. And so I made the biggest mistake of trying to avoid it. The unavoidable question during the holidays and Thanksgiving. Don't talk about, Yvonne's husband because she's probably very depressed. Of course I was very depressed, but Kate, I try to avoid it. And what I did is I redid Christmas for my daughter and I. We set a new tradition, which is a wonderful idea because if the loss is fresh, I always recommend set a new tradition. So we did Christmas in New York for about 5 to 10 years. And it set a new tradition, but it was avoiding the unavoidable. And what I've learned now is to just face it head on, realizing that I have some beautiful Christmas memories of my husband. So I want my daughter to remember those and to remember those treasured memories. So I accept that there's going to be a lot of crying, tears of love, and being good with it. And that's how I'm able to move forward with it. And people, my friends, and surrounding myself with people that I feel most comfortable with. People that know that I'm walking in with a box of Kleenex and we're going to share funny, hilarious, loving memories of my father and my husband. So, yeah. So that's one great way to do it. And then I have some tricks for overwhelm. Sometimes when it's really too much and too soon, I do have a couple of techniques. And the most important one is the Heart Math Institute, where we actually interrupt the stress response by doing the deep breathing, placing your hand on your heart, and you interrupt the overwhelm or the stress response from taking over. And that helps me each and every time. So those are just a couple of things that I've started to do to tweak the holidays for me and to demystify the holidays.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you say about that avoidance because that's often what we're doing with so much, isn't it? We're just trying to get me away, get me out of this situation. And I know you've shared in your challenge about that, making radical changes all at
Right,
once.
right,
And I think, yeah, that's a really, from a behavioral perspective, that's really interesting, because that's obviously a response to a challenging situation. We want to get out of it.
right. And I think that's what happened with me. I made radical changes to my exterior.
Mm,
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, I actually uprooted my daughter from our childhood home. We moved to
mhm,
another school, to another city, to another job. And so I was desperately seeking to fill that loneliness, that void in my heart. But changing jobs, even getting married and divorced,
yeah,
realizing that it had to come from within.
yeah,
I had to do a radical self-assessment, self-awareness, self-compassion. And I realized that I was my world's worst enemy
yeah.
because I wasn't letting myself feel those emotions. I kept
Mhm.
running. So yeah, I think it's a learning journey where
Yeah.
we learn, we try different strategies, and then we grow, and then
Mm,
we keep moving as long as we're moving forward and growing and amenable to change. I think that's the key, and not staying in the same old, within the same old perspective and perception that
mm,
kept me stuck for a long time. So,
mm,
but
yeah,
I think you're right. We need to go back to move forward. Unfortunately, I realize that we have to go back to reconnect. We
yeah.
can't. Uh, I know that I was probably a master at avoiding the grief for a long time, but then that overwhelm just built up so
Mm,
much that it was like a volcanic overwhelm eruption when I finally did erupt. And it was when I finally went back to reconnect with that, with those, with that emotional pain, with the grief, the shame, the blame and guilt, that I was able to finally start mending myself and loving myself again and saying, oh, it's okay for me to
yeah.
have felt, the way I felt. So, yeah.
And that's another interesting point, isn't it? The fear around facing the emotions.
Right.
And
Exactly.
it was very interesting. I know you and I were both on Kathy's presentation this morning and her
Yes.
transformation journey. And she talked about that, the busy, keeping
Yeah.
busy to avoid dealing with stuff. And I think that's one of the hardest things, isn't it, to actually sit with those really strong feelings and strong emotions.
I, I totally agree with you because, like I mentioned, my husband died the day after Christmas. My
Mm,
daughter playing with all of her Christmas toys. And I did not know he had been in this horrible accident, and the hospital was trying to reach me for 3 to 4 hours.
mm,
And I lived in a border town. So it happened on the Mexican side of the border. And the hospital he was at did not have the proper facility to deal
mm,
with trauma. So he was holding on for dear life by a thread.
mm,
So when I finally found out that he was in an accident and I reached out, he had just passed away.
mm,
So for me, him dying alone in a foreign country um, created this shame,
mm,
blame, and guilt. And I think for me, busying myself with all of these distractions helped me avoid what I needed to face. But it
mm,
it wasn't until I reconnected again with those feelings, the
mm,
shame, the guilt, that I was able to finally give it space, realizing that it was okay to feel that. It
mm,
was okay to, you know, and actually go back to the scene and I found out that it was actually, this was a pretty story because he was actually with a missionary nun. It was a nun that was holding his hand when he passed away. So it
Yeah.
gave me a lot of solace. It gave me a lot of peace to
Mm,
go back and share that with my daughter and with my friends and family. So
mm,
in rediscovering and those emotions, I'm always amazed with the strength that we can gain from those memories. And it's just having the courage to sit with yourself and
yeah.
face them.
Yeah.
But I'm always surprised with what we'll learn from those
Mm,
experiences. And it just makes us stronger moving forward. Knowing that we're not broken,
yeah.
we're we're we're
Yeah.
we're able to do this, and we're completing the cycle of those emotions that were stopped.
Mm. So that would have been another whole year, obviously, before you had to face your first Christmas as a
Right,
family.
right.
Have you got anything to share from that first Christmas that might help
Oh my
people?
God. I the first Christmas after
Yeah.
we my what my daughter and I did, because it was so raw,
Mm,
we did start new traditions,
yeah.
and we started making new memories, which were beautiful. We did that for many years, and it helped us. It helped us to live through it.
Mm,
But also, I think always bringing up the memories. If we had gatherings with family and friends, we'd always make it a point to have someone bring their favorite story of
okay.
my
Yeah.
to share, and it would inevitably lead us to a funny, hilarious story of his humor and his love for life.
Mm,
Um, that was one thing we did. And I suggest to a lot of friends and family that have just lost either a spouse or a child to demystify the holidays. If they have gatherings, have their friends bring their treasured memories. And always remembering that everybody does grief differently. I know that when I first started traveling to New York, people would say, "How could you go? How could you go and do that?" And I always thought, I'm the one that lost the husband. It's my
yeah.
daughter who lost her father. We
Yeah.
do grief. Everybody does grief. Everybody does it their own way.
Mm,
So as long as you remember that and not listen to
mm,
other people as to how you should do grief or how you shouldn't do grief, I think there's no rule book, there's no blueprint, and just doing it the way that makes you feel most at peace
yeah.
is important.
And that's a very important point that I'm often sharing with people is it's how do you feel about it? Because often the logical thing isn't necessarily the one that makes you feel good.
Right,
Um,
right,
and it's interesting, isn't it, how other people can have that strength of feeling around grief about what you should do and shouldn't do,
right,
which can
right.
be quite powerful
Yeah. I
influence on.
I do remember my dear friend from Laredo brought over her boombox the day of Christmas the following year. And I was still, well, no, it was before Christmas. We had a little Christmas party, but she brought this boombox and we were all very bummed out. And we danced the whole night. We listened to Christmas music and we just had a ball.
Yeah,
And it's just creating, I mean, we forget that we have this incredible power to choose how we will live, or how we will create our mental theater, what will allow to come in and
yeah,
what will allow to keep out. We can excise you know, the sadness and maybe deal with it, but then put it aside and bring in hopefully more joyous memories and
Mm,
and behave in a certain way that will bring more joy and happiness.
yeah.
But it's within our power to choose. We forget that. Sometimes we live on autopilot unconsciously and we just flow with what we just let our life flow
Mm,
meaninglessly. But if we live with intention and mindfully and consciously, then we can sort of dictate how our life will turn out. I think
mm,
we can
yeah, love
do
it.
that.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of that is the conditioning, isn't it? It's our culture as well that, we grieve and everyone's quiet. And when you said about don't bring it up, don't mention it, don't talk about it,
Right.
there's a lot of baggage for people to deal with. So, but I love those ideas because, especially with you and what you're doing with your future work with your course, it's that awareness that this is the beginning, isn't it? This is
Right.
putting that band-aid on to get us through Christmas, sit with it, acknowledge it, don't try and
Right.
run from it or hide from it.
Right. Right.
Bring your memories.
Right.
And
Now,
then,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, and then, where to next? And
Right.
it's that
Right.
awareness that to be for a sustainable change and growth, it's going to
Right.
be an ongoing process, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we need techniques to get us through the really emotional days. And
Yeah.
I think there's techniques that I've learned and I think we shared the emotional freedom technique that Tammy Amit talked about. And it's one that I think would be very useful for some people that may feel, especially with their first Christmas or their first holiday without their loved ones. It's a tapping exercise that while you're feeling the emotion, whether it's sadness or anxiety or overwhelm,
Mm,
it can help you reduce the emotion or the
okay.
overwhelm.
Yeah.
And I started using it, and it's actually tapping the different acupuncture points
Mm,
within your body while you're feeling the emotion of overwhelm.
okay.
And that's for people that really have that emotional feeling that they just is a little bit more than just the sadness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's techniques that can be used,
Mm,
but you're right. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to move on to stage 2 for 2024, because
yeah.
I think a lot of people who grieve, like you mentioned, there's a lot of conditioning. We tend to, while we're grieving, we're trying to preserve our loved ones' treasured memories. So when we successfully do that, we're able to move forward, not leaving them behind, but bringing that treasured memory forward. But we forget to bring ourselves forward. We
Yeah.
leave ourselves buried in the grave with our loved ones. So we need to learn, and this sounds a little selfish, but we need to learn to be selfish to the point where we resurrect our true essence. We, with a radical self-awareness, compassion and self-acceptance to discover who we are now, rediscover, recreate our new todays, our new years, and our new destiny, and taking an active role. That's I'm excited about that for 2024, and doing a mini course to help others find
Watch
their self.
the- Yeah. Yeah. And I just think that you've sort of captured that idea of, when you say about leaving us, burying ourselves, that was such a strong visual. And I remember you talking about that in
Yeah,
your challenge, because and that ties in with that guilt, doesn't it? I can't move on because they're not here.
right.
And yeah, I
Yeah.
just love the way you framed that, because I think that the imagery of that is massive. And then we remind ourselves of all those corny expressions about how would they want us to feel,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. No, yeah. Yeah. I really don't think for me it wasn't corny because I literally, I'm very spiritual. So in my heart of hearts, I do believe my husband moved on, was
Mm,
transitioned into the spiritual world.
yeah,
So I made the mistake of I continued going to the cemetery, but I knew he had already transitioned. He was physically dead, but spiritually alive.
yeah,
I realized that although I was physically alive, I was spiritually dead.
yeah.
So I and I and what I think what I told you back then was I was going to the cemetery not to see him, but to see myself. I was grieving me because I remember my God, I remember this so clearly. Because there were three people that died when my husband died. There was a deposition where a lawyer asked me, well, how do you feel
Mm,
about this whole situation? And I remember answering and I said, I died. I
mm,
died with
mm,
him. And I was dead. The emptiness was just something I could not fill.
mm,
So it's resurrecting yourself from the grave, pulling yourself out of the grave, even though they've moved on, you are, oh, and unfortunately, I'm a member of many support groups for widows.
mm,
This feeling is common, Kate.
mm.
That feeling that you died alongside them.
Yeah, yeah.
So resurrecting yourself is the next step. You've
Mm.
resurrected their true essence to carry it with you, but now you have to resurrect yourself to complement their true essence and to start pursuing those dreams and those goals.
Wow. That's really profound and a great message.
And
Thank you.
and we have the power to do it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
When we're living on autopilot, and I think I shared some of the stats. 40 to 90% of the time we are living on autopilot, unconsciously living. And that's why we get stuck. We just let our emotions go wherever. But if we're conscious, then we can take back control.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can do it. We have the power to do it. It's just using it.
And deciding, which I think you brought up right at the beginning. And
Yeah,
again, I think Becky brought that up as well, didn't she? Make a
yeah,
decision. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
amazing. Some great stuff there,
Yeah,
Yvonne.
but when we see ourselves as creators, as directors, as producers, it's like a Steven Spielberg. Every morning we wake up with a gift, with a clean slate. We decide what intention to set. We can either, wake up in a bad mood, negative, or with gratitude. I Today I was thinking about the holidays and I thought, instead of thinking I don't have my husband, I don't have my father, I am so grateful I had my husband and the experiences that I had with him, with my father, the journey we went through together, how much he loved life, how much I have to share of him with others, but
Yeah.
implementing it. We don't implement it. We know about it, but we don't share it. So as the producer and creator of your mental theater, each and every day, we we start clean. We start with a clean slate. So if we imagine that and tap into that imagination, oh my God, the world is ours. We can create whatever we want.
And, you know, the behavior analyst in me says, yes, it's taking action, isn't it?
Yeah,
Taking,
taking action.
yeah,
That's the key, taking action. And I remember from your course, setting goals,
yeah,
setting a plan. What
yeah,
is it that you'd like to see in the future? I think a lot of us that are in grief, our goal and our dream is so dim.
yeah,
It's so insignificant that we'd prefer to go back to the prison of the past.
yeah,
So if we set that goal and that dream, with possible making a plan with steps that are doable,
yep,
not crazy out of this world goals, but even tiny steps. I learned that from you. Set-
yeah, yeah,
Setting a plan in putting it into action,
yeah.
even if they're baby steps, and congratulating ourselves
Along.
for taking those steps forward.
And I think that's a beautiful one to highlight is that, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
for yourself and giving yourself the love that you deserve and the acknowledgement that you are getting through a challenge, because we're always about what we need to do and where we should be. And I think that's that self-compassion which you talked about earlier.
And giving yourself permission.
Yeah, yeah.
But for me, it was first, it was giving myself permission to leave the scene of the tragedy, then the
Mm,
scene of the hospital, then the scene of the cemetery, and then now the season of grieving.
brilliant.
It's just saying, it's okay. We can do this. Let's move forward. And if we take two steps back, it's okay. We have techniques to get us through it. And we were talking about that corny analogy. I always think about what my husband, how he would want me to remember him. And I know he'd be very upset if he knew that I was crying and moping and depressed, because
Mm,
he was a person full of life and gusto.
yeah.
And I know he's at Heaven's Gate yelling back at me and saying, damn it, start living. I've
Oh, God.
already made it past and you haven't even started living. And sometimes I see myself in that fashion where I need to wake up and start living.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Well, hugely appreciative of your story and your sharing, Yvonne. I think there's some absolute gems in there. And I just love the way you managed to share something that's pretty tragic in a way with so much, I say positivity, that's not quite the right word, but hope and potential and learning. You know, as you said, you've come out of this learning so much and now being a gift to other people, you know, as we saw with Kathy this morning,
My God.
you know,
Yes.
you're able to support other people because you've got such a powerful story to share. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate you having me on. I love sitting with you. I learn from you each and every day. Your message is wonderful. Your techniques are wonderful. And I'm grateful that you're in my life.
Thank you, Yvonne. Likewise. Well, we look forward until the next time, and we'll be watching this space for 2024. I will obviously share information for people to contact you. Where's the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, I actually have Finally Letting Go group, and I am on Facebook and on Instagram. So, and I will be posting something on my course coming up in 2024. So I will send you info. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Yvonne.
Thank you
Bye
for
for now.
having me. Bye-bye.